Hello, everyone. My name's Adam Crowell. I'm President and General Counsel at ComplyNet, and I have the pleasure of being in attendance with Steve Gibson from Dealer Risk Services. And this is part of our Coverage Coffee Break series. And in this particular series, today we're going to be talking about active shooter coverage. We've talked about a number of other coverages in the past. Active shooter is a very important topic. It could spell disaster if it were something that were to happen at your dealership or at one of your businesses. And we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about what sort of coverages are typical, what things may be potentially excluded, and we're going to talk about some other things too as a part of this process. We're going to talk about things like risk mitigation and what are some things that should be happening through the risk mitigation process. So as we get started, just a couple of housekeeping matters here. During this presentation, please feel free to ask questions. There is a chat feature that is on the control panel for GoToWebinar. And you can ask questions. We'll try to answer those at the end of this presentation. Also, for those of you that are in attendance, there is going to be a drawing for a gift card at the end of this presentation. And then the other thing that is being offered to the people that are attending today is that if you want to have some workplace violence and active shooter training for your employees at your dealerships, ComplyNet is going to offer a free course to all of your employees for free. So we're not going to charge you anything if you want to take advantage of that. If you already have something along those lines, that's fine. But if you want to take advantage of that, we'll have all of our information at the end of this, and you can reach out to us. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Stephen Gibson. Stephen is a long-term insurance broker, and when I say insurance broker, I want to say really he's a risk mitigation specialist. What he focuses on ways that he can help mitigate risk with you, and certainly insurance is one of those products. He's also certainly an expert when it comes to shifting risk potentially with other vendors and with other people that you may be doing business with. He comes from the automotive background. He's been working with dealers for a very long time. He's a national speaker. He's very much involved with very many dealer associations. I personally met Steve many years ago at the National Association of Dealership Council conferences. And he is a tremendous resource, and we're very happy to have him speaking today. Steve, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate it. And as always, welcome everyone. And thank you for attending our coffee break series. During the series, as Adam pointed out, we just try to run through the coverages that are applicable to the dealership arena and things that you should have in your program, or certainly things that you should be aware of if you don't already have it in your program. So today the topic is something that no one likes to talk about, but unfortunately it is a sign of the times. And we do have some situations, and as we all know, there have been situations throughout the country that have caused a tremendous amount of chaos, as well as loss of income and regrettably loss of life due to active shooter and or active assailant. So as these situations started to arise, the insurance industry really didn't know in the beginning how to deal with it. And our first questions to some of our insurance underwriters and some of our claims people in the industry was, is this covered? And the answers that we got back were disconcerting. The answers we got back were, we don't know. We don't know if a situation like this is covered or not, and if the business owner or the dealer is going to be indemnified for potential liability. Because as we know, liability is based on negligence, and you would have to be negligent in protecting your employees and or your people in order for there to be coverage. So our industry friends at Lloyd's, the most creative of all facilities, quickly came up with some coverage for active shooter, active assailant. So we're going to go through the coverage forms. We're going to go through some scenarios and just kind of talk about it for a few minutes. And again, as Adam said, feel free to ask any questions that you may have. So the where and why, where are the exposures for active shooter and or active assailant, people that would be disruptive to a institution or a work environment? And as you look at them, they really kind of list those, and what they are is they are areas where many people would gather and or areas that make a statement like a religious institution. And what are the motivating factors that would cause someone to want to do bodily harm or property damage to one of these establishments? And the first and foremost is some sort of mental instability. And we understand that, and certainly that's a concern for everyone in our country in today's environment. But also it can go beyond that, and not just someone that has come pardon me, maybe a little bit unhinged or a little bit totally distressed, but it can also be a domestic dispute or perhaps an employment dispute or even an employee dispute. And then last but not least are the political and or religious ideologies, someone that just totally disagrees with a particular faith or a particular political arrangement, whoever's in power that they might be vehemently in disagreement with. So these things can cause people to want to, in their mind, plan and plot out, some sort of disruption. So let's talk about what happens with active shooter coverage, or active assailant as it's called. The coverage highlights and the programs that were developed by Lloyd's, and again, they're kind of in the forefront with coming up with coverage for things like this. They will provide you with coverage for an actual attack or even a threat of an attack. And as with all insurance policies, the first thing that you need to do, and if you're entertaining a type of coverage, whether it's active assailant, whether it's pollution, whether it's cyber, whatever it may be, our advice always is to look at the insuring agreement. The insuring agreement of any insurance policy says, if this happens, then we will do this. So inside that, you'll find some key words, and then you need to go to the definitions section and see exactly what those keywords mean, and then go to the exclusions and figure out, what they're pulling away from that particular policy. With an active assailant policy, the definitions that are important are insured person, event, and weapon. What is considered a weapon and what is not considered a weapon? We need the broadest of language in that, so that we're not just talking about an AK or an AR or something like that, or even a handgun. We can be talking about a knife. We can be talking about a pipe bomb. We can be talking about anything. And folks, again, I apologize for this. It's unfortunate that we need to talk about this, but you need to be able to understand, like anything else, what would happen if something like this happened at my dealership. So if a part of good risk management is kind of going through the what if situations. So the active shooter coverage will provide you with legal liability for people that are injured because of an event at the dealership. As well, it will provide you with loss of earnings for the time that your dealership is closed, and or some loss of attraction. So we know that if we get roped off by the police because there is a situation at the dealership, it's certainly going to preclude people from wanting to go there tomorrow or the next day. They're going to want to, wait until the dust settles a little bit, till they get more comfortable with the fact that we've just had a terrible situation at the dealership. As well, there's one thing that you can look for as far as loss of attraction. Buried deep inside these policies, and if it's not, you can certainly request it, is to have a proximity to the dealership. So if the dealership is 3/4 of a mile from Walmart or another retail establishment, and that retail establishment has an event that all of a sudden winds up with the roads being blocked and or affects the dealership from a loss of earnings perspective, the customers aren't coming to that area of town, then we can also get coverage for something that maybe didn't happen directly at the dealership, but within a proximity of the dealership. Kind of like in property terms, we would call that off-premise business interruption, right? Something that happens away from the premise that affects the premise. Then one of the main parts of any type of active shooter coverage, and this will relate kind of back to cyber, if you will, for just a minute, is the public relations portion. So if we have an event that is traumatic at the dealership and causes a lot of adverse press, then we're going to need to respond to that. Inside the active shooter or active assailant policies is a public relations perspective, which will have a team of PR people that will help respond for the dealership to help, temper the event with the public, if you will, and try to put some type of, positive spin, if it can possibly be done, just to make sure that we return to normal as quickly as possible. Obviously, counseling is important, not just for any customers that are on the dealership, but certainly for the employees. I mean, they're going to be traumatized. So inside the policy as well is some counseling perspective that will help with making sure that everyone can return back to life as normal as quickly as possible. And then some forensic analysis. So in other words, trying to determine exactly what happened, why it happened, and how we could have prevented it from happening. That's always important with any type of traumatic situation, whether it's a cyber event or whether it's an unfortunate active shooter event. Now let's talk about the potential coverage gaps. And I think the first thing is what I mentioned in the beginning, the uncertainty if there's any coverage under the garage. And as we know, umbrella policies follow the garage. So if there's not any coverage under the garage policy, then more than likely there's not going to be any coverage under the umbrella policy. So we need something that is primary. And so ideally you would have a active shooter or active assailant policy that stands on its own with a very broad trigger that would give you coverage for an attack or even a threat of attack. And then as well, the crisis management. We need a 1-800 number that we can pick up and call and say, oh my goodness, this is what's going on at the dealership, or this is what happened at the dealership. And we need to have an immediate response for our personnel, for any customers that are on the dealership premise, and or any vendors that are on the dealership premise. I know Adam, as the president of ComplyNet, he visits dealerships. Myself, as the president of Dealer Risk Services, we visit dealerships. There are all kinds of other people other than just customers and employees that are at the dealerships that can be affected when an event like this happens. Let's talk about risk mitigation for just a minute. And I know that Adam is going to chime in just a second, but one of the first things, as I mentioned previously, that you need to do as a good solid risk management practice is sit down with your team and talk about the what ifs. What if this happened? What if that happened? And what we hear so often from dealers in situations, and we heard this certainly when cyber coverage first came on the forefront, and people said, well, that's never happened to me. And then, of course, with active assailant or active shooter, and they say, well, that's never happened to me. Well, of course it hasn't happened, and God willing, it never will. But in case it does, you need to be ready. So the first thing that you need to do is make sure that you're prepared. And the first step is always a vulnerability assessment. And the vulnerability assessment will talk about, what are our actual security levels at the dealership? Do we have any training for the employees, any type of crisis management plans and protocols? Who is going to push the panic button? Who are they going to call with the panic button? Where are we going to send people if something terrible happens out in the parking lot or in the showroom? What are we going to do? How are we going to alert the people in the back, the detail people, the mechanics, the technicians, the parts people, the clerical people? Where is going to be our safe room to get these people out of potentially harm's way? And again, as I mentioned, who are we going to call and who's going to call them? And this is just a matter of being prepared for something terrible happen. We have all seen irate employees that come back into the dealership because they're dissatisfied maybe with how the process went. Maybe they're dissatisfied with the car. Maybe they're having buyer's remorse, and they're ranting and raving in the dealership, causing a little bit of disconcernment with the balance of the customers and the employees that are there. This is just taking it to the next level and saying, okay, if it really gets to be an issue, if somebody shows up and really gets to be violent or threatens to be violent, or maybe they're doing something unheard of, like firing a pistol or a rifle, what do we do? Okay. And lastly, I think as a part of the risk mitigation, you need to talk about what the financial cost would be. What's it going to cost us at the dealership if we're shut down for a day, if we're shut down for a week? What's it going to cost us at the dealership if we lose some of our reputation and our attraction for a week, for 2 weeks, for 3 weeks, for a month, for whatever it may be? We saw the situation, all of us did, at the Wynn Hotel in Las Vegas. How quickly does a business recover from something like that? And do they fully recover? And Adam, I'll just turn it over to you for a minute.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And, that is all very scary stuff when you really think about it. When it comes to any sort of standards that might apply for things like workplace violence or for shooter sort of situations, from a federal standpoint with OSHA does not have a specific standard that applies, but OSHA has said the general duty clause can apply. And for those of you that are not familiar with the general duty clause, it basically says that employers must have a place of employment that is free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm. So if an employer that has experienced some sort of acts of workplace violence or becomes aware of a threat, intimidation, or other indicators, then in that situation, they need to be proactive, and they need to create some sort of workplace violence prevention program. And that program should have a lot of different information in it, certainly, that's telling people what to recognize as a potential hazard, what the reporting requirements should be, and how to address those situations. In these types of situations, though, I would say that OSHA is probably the least of the concerns, as Steve hit on the head, the business interruption, the loss of goodwill, the loss of blue sky, and certainly, hate to say it, but this is when the lawyers come out, right? So what you're looking at in those types of situations is and you always hear about this when something bad like this happens, that there were signs, they knew or they should have known. And when you talk about negligence claims and ordinary negligence claims, it's whether or not someone acted appropriately under the circumstances. Did they exercise ordinary care under the circumstances? And this is where the plaintiff's attorneys can get creative and they can say, look, this business, you should have known. There were all these signs that were present. This thing happened before. You didn't do anything about it, and now that is the result of, you know, some sort of injury claim or some sort of, you know, some sort of wrongful death or survivorship sort of claim. And when you have those types of claims, they can be very, very expensive. And what you really have to worry about is, do you have enough coverage in those types of situations? Because if you don't, that could be a situation where now it's coming out of pocket. So one of the things that we've put together and that we're going to be offering to anybody that wants to take advantage of it, we have a workplace violence and active shooter course available that we built based upon the recommendations of both OSHA and the Department of Homeland Security. So we're going to be providing that to you at the end of this. There will be my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me, email me. You can call me if you like, and we'll get anyone that wants to be on that training their employees, and you can document that you've actually provided that sort of training to your employees.
Adam, thank you very much. And I think, you know, I think information is a very powerful tool. And I think one thing that Adam talked about that is very important is that, you know, in the forensic analysis, particularly if it is not a political or religious or ideological situation, you know, maybe it stems back to a child custody dispute. Maybe it stems back to a marital dispute. Maybe it stems back to something of that nature that maybe if the dealership had been aware of it, they might have been able to help in mitigating, you know, the situation, or at least controlling the situation. A good idea, you know, to get your people to be able to communicate with HR on a confidential level. I mean, obviously people's personal lives is their personal lives, but when we go back and we talk about active assailant or potential shootings at, you know, at retail establishments, at banks, at things of that nature, oftentimes we find that it has its roots in some type of domestic dispute of some sort. And if we think about it, folks, you know, that should be something that maybe can be mitigated a little bit. Let's talk about how to find active shooter coverage. As I mentioned, you know, the Lloyd's market is on the forefront. So the first thing to do is really understand where to get it. It's certainly not something we're going to get from Liberty Mutual or Travelers or the Hartford or any of those standard carriers. And it's not going to be something that is typically included in your garage policy. Now, I will tell you that currently, and because the frequency of such an event like this is so rare, it's terrible, it's devastating, but it is actuarially rare, so the cost is not very, very high. You can buy active shooter coverage, you can buy $1 million, you can buy 3 million, 5 million, 10 million without spending a whole lot of money. The key is to find the market. I would recommend finding a good broker that is connected with the Lloyd's market. You know, either the Millers or perhaps the Hiscocks of the world. You know, those are a couple of carriers that do a really good job with active shooter coverage. And then be sure to look at the forms and, you know, dive into the forms and find the broadest coverage that you can find with the broadest trigger and the broadest definitions of insured and or weapon, you know, and then find the triggering verbiage and make sure that it has 24/7 crisis management consultation. Go so far as to check out the PR firm and make sure that that's a good, credible PR firm for your need. And then lastly, I would want to try and tailor any type of active assailant coverage to complement the terrorism coverage. You know, that terrorism is a peculiar coverage when you get down into it and start reading who has to determine that something is terrorism. And I think if you can get into the market and maybe purchase terrorism on a standalone basis, complementing it with active shooter type coverage, then I think you can have the broadest situation for what might happen to your property, causing property damage, liability, and or loss of income, and God forbid, loss of life. So that's pretty much where we are. Outsourcing the risk assessment and training. I know that Adam just mentioned that his firm is doing some risk assessment. It's good to employ an outside firm with anything like this, whether it's active shooter coverage or whether it's cyber coverage. You need a third party, a brand new set of eyes outside the dealership looking in to be able to give you a better idea of exactly what you have or don't have in any areas that you might be vulnerable. So here we are. Adam is going to, and ComplyNet is going to have a giveaway.
Once again, for anyone that is interested, we are more than willing to provide this sort of training module to your organization for your employees. And this is something that applies not just for line employees, but also for managers too. So we're more than willing to do that. Once again, just reach out to me at the end of this and we'll get you all set up for it.
All righty. Thank you so much, Adam. And also, DRS, our firm, we thank you as always for attending the Coffee Break Series. We enjoy doing this. We enjoy talking about insurance. We love the dealership arena, been working in it, as Adam mentioned, for an awful long time, I think 35 years now. So we are as well going to give away a $50 gift card for attending the webinar. And this month's gift card goes to Paul Filio. So Paul, we thank you for joining us. We appreciate your interest, and anyone that should have any questions about this particular topic, or really anything that's relative to dealership insurance or questions about, you know, getting the proper insurance or having the correct form for a situation, you know, we provide insurance expertise to the automotive industry, and we do that mainly in the form of education. So Adam and I are both more than willing and would welcome the opportunity to review anything that you send us and give you a very objective opinion. So we thank you all for joining us, and Adam, we thank you for co-hosting and wish you all a good day.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.